I can take a very brief question or comment. I'm not sure who had the last one.
No, sorry, it's questions and comments.
Yeah, who was the last one? Oh, just starting. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll go to the honourable member for Markham Unionville for the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I congratulate my colleague for his speech, and I heard him say many times how important this was. So I guess my question is the following. If this bill is so important and urgent to the government, and since the government has known for years the schedule on which these changes in the U.S. requirements would be introduced, why did they introduce this bill at the very last minute, the last day of the summer, when they could have introduced it many months or even a year earlier? I don't understand why the urgency coincides with the very slow speed of introducing this bill. Is it simply incompetence, or is it some other motive the government had for waiting until the last minute?
The honourable member for Edmonton St. Albert.
Well, it was neither, Mr. Speaker. Certainly the government has many priorities, and if the honourable member listened to my comments, and I know that he sits, or I believe he sits on the Transport Committee, he'll know that important negotiations were made and ultimately consummated with the U.S. authorities regarding a very important exemption regarding flights originating in Canada, but also landing in Canada, but who might happen to fly over U.S. airspace between those two destinations. There was some time and some significant negotiations involved in negotiating that exemption. So there were a number of issues as to that contributed to the timing of the introduction of this piece of legislation, and nothing to do with what the honourable member might suggest, and certainly in conformity with the importance that the government places on this legislation.
Questions and comments. Questions and commentaires. The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for his speech today. My information is that there's approximately 100 flights from Canada over United States territory per day, but there are approximately 2,000 American flights going over Canadian territory per day. And I'd like to ask the member whether the government made any attempt at reciprocity here, that if the Americans are asking us for information, did we say, well, we will provide you the information provided you provide us with the information on all of your passengers? And if that's the case, I'd just like to see the effect that demand would have on the American carriers, because it wouldn't be long before there'd be a lot of pressure on United States legislators from the airlines, from American Airlines and American passengers, who might be equally upset about this issue. So I'd like to ask the member, did they make any effort to get any...
Just going to stop the member there to allow the honourable member for Edmonton St. Albert a chance to respond.
I'm not exactly certain what the relevance of reciprocity is, Mr. Speaker. What is relevant about this piece of legislation, and what this piece of legislation attempts to remedy, is the problem, or the reality, let me say, that Canadian carriers would have to circumvent the entirety of U.S. airspace if they were traveling to a third country, such as Mexico or Cuba or any of the Caribbean countries. It would have to take an indirect flight route so that it could avoid the entirety of American airspace, because the tenets of international law are quite clear that the U.S. authorities can require this information or prevent Canadian airlines from entering that space. So the purpose of this legislation is to correct that, to provide the Canadian traveling public with a safe but also cost-effective and direct route to its ultimate destination, and to comply with the requirements of the U.S. Secure Flight Program.
There's enough time for one more brief question or comment. The honourable member for Newton North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was listening to the member from Edmonton St. Albert mentioning the exemption for the flights originating and ending in Canada. But, Mr. Speaker, my constituents of Newton North Delta, and I'm deeply disappointed that this Conservative government was unable to secure an exemption for all Canadian flights in its negotiations with Americans. Through you, Mr. Speaker, why could they not convince them that Canadian security screening standards already ensure the safety for our flights?
Good question.
The honourable member for Edmonton St. Albert.
Well, I mean, I'm not privy to the reasons as to why the U.S. Transportation Department was not satisfied. What I do know is that this is what they required. I also understand the the realities of international law, which say that they can ask for these lists. So the simple reality is quite simple, that if this bill is not passed, Canadian carriers who are flying to, for example, Caribbean destinations will have to circumvent U.S. airspace at great cost, at great inconvenience, and a huge waste of fuel that nobody wants to see, and there's no reason to do it.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for